Animating a character can feel like a daunting task. You need to manage a huge stack of layers and keyframes and pre-comps for simple movements that can quickly get overwhelming and time-consuming. There are also many ways to do it, many plugins to choose from, and a lot of advice out there already. I'm Jess, I'm a professional motion and graphics designer, and in this video we are going to distill it as simply as possible and cover two main approaches to character animation in After Effects: simple parenting and rigging, and my workflow for animating this little scene. But hey, even if you are just beginning, maybe give it a crack anyway. Learning something is better than learning nothing. If you are a true beginner though, and this is going to be too much, we do have a good tutorial on After Effects basics you can find here. We are going to animate two characters in a video game face-off scene. This design is actually from another tutorial on character design, so if you would like to learn how to craft your own characters first before you animate, you can check out that one in the link below. Otherwise, I've uploaded the project files for this scene so you can follow along and just do the rigging and animation if you like. So let's open After Effects and get into it. Here we are in After Effects. I've got a 1920 by 1080 comp to match my storyboard, some folders here for organization, and some essential plugins I use, mainly Ease Copy, which you can get for free, but if you really like it and use it as much as I do, which you will, chuck them a couple bucks. And I also use Overlord quite regularly to bring things over from Illustrator into After Effects. It's not essential because you can do this just by dropping the files in, but I do find it really useful. So the first thing I'm going to do is always make a rough block of the timing of my scene. I've got these storyboard frames and I'm going to drop them in the timeline and change the lengths depending on how long I want each one on for. Now we are ready to bring in our shapes and begin animating. I'm going to start with our little crab dude. He has already been nicely layered in Illustrator with all the bits that will need to move independently on separate layers, and those layers have been named. Now, this is probably where I would use the Overlord plugin, as it means you could effectively skip that step and push all of these shapes to After Effects and do all that renaming and stuff in there. But if you don't have Overlord, you just need to make sure your character is layered like so, and then you can import it to After Effects. So then we're going to right-click and create shapes from vector layers to have all of our layers editable and pre-compose all of that into a crab-only composition. This video is brought to you by Envato, unlimited creative assets all in one place. With the broadest range of categories, you can follow the link in the description and start creating now. When you're animating in After Effects, there are two main approaches to character animation. The first step is just using simple parenting techniques and shape path animation to bring your character to life. Now, this is a good approach if you, one, have a character who only needs to move a little bit or who isn't using their full range of motion on a limb. Two, you need to make a more complex movement happen, like a flip or a big shift in perspective. Or three, maybe the animation style you're going for is more staccato and stylized, where the natural movements of limbs aren't really required. It's sort of closer to frame by frame, but by parenting basic chains of limbs and changing rotation points, you can make it a little bit quicker than cell animation. For our crab, he doesn't need to move too much, and I want his movement to be kind of janky, but I also want him to flip, so we're going to animate him in this way. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do with our crab, now that we have all of his layers editable as shapes in After Effects, is go through and adjust all our anchor points. So we want to think about where this is rotating from. So if you use this pan behind tool up here, you can grab that anchor point and move it there. And then if I hit R on my keyboard to bring up the rotation, I can see now that that arm is rotating from the point that I want it to. So we're just going to do that for every shape. I'm just going to work sort of out of his body. Now our anchor points are in position. We want to make some chains of parents. So our claws, for instance, are going to be obviously connected to our arms. So let's select this whole left arm, and I'm going to change the color of it. Oops, not to the same color. Do a different color just so I can see exactly what I'm working with here. And let's pull this up so we've got a bit more visibility. These two claw pieces are going to connect to our arm, and our arm here is going to obviously connect to our body. So here's our body layer. This is just this shadow piece. So this is kind of the main one where we want to pair in everything to. But yeah, now you can see that that arm is connected. But also if I rotate this arm, it's going to connect with that. So simple stuff, but effective, easy rig. Now everything is all connected to our body and everything rotates from the right point as well. We are ready to add some animation to this. Now that we've got a sense basically of the kind of movement that we want, let's block out some poses first. So his bend is going to happen here, and I can see from our storyboard that his arms just kind of come down and he gets a bit squishier, flatter. So all I have to do really here is rotate these arms down. So let's put some keyframes in here. So you can hold Option and Shift and then use your back arrow keys or forward arrow keys to move a keyframe back 10 frames. Or if you don't hold Shift, you just hold Alt, then you can move back 1 frame. So that's a handy one to have. I'm just going to move that back and then rotate these around until we're matching that pose like that. That looks pretty good. And we also need to squish his body. And I'm going to do that with a path animation. So if you double press U, you'll bring up your stuff in here. And then going to squish this shape down slightly. Let's bring his mouth down as well. Not bad. Let's do the legs as well. I'm going to put some position keyframes here and just move them all up, as because his body kind of sinks and his legs go up. Like that. Okay, so there's his bend pose. And then we want him to spring up. So a few frames after that, we're going to kind of reverse all this animation and put him back to the way he was. So let's just copy these keyframes. So there we go. Now he kind of jumps. Maybe we'll pull out all these a little bit longer so that he's kind of coming down for a little bit longer. Cool. I actually think I want him to hold in this bend pose as well for a bit longer. So I'm going to just copy a still keyframe here so that copy all these same positions. So he holds in the down position. Perfect. So now we want him to kind of jump and roll, and I'm going to do his actual jump animation in this comp out here, because if I wanted to say like cut into a close-up of his animation as he was jumping or rolling, it's a lot easier to do that then, because I can just put this crab rig in a new composition and scale it up and you know, have that happen with the same base animation. So let's just do some really basic blocking of his animation here. If I open up the position keyframe on our rig, and when he bends here, he's got same position. And when he starts to bend, I want to just move him down a little bit. So I'm just using my down arrows to do that. And then we want his spring to start happening basically from here once he's stopped holding that bend. You can also go in here and get this exact timing if you want, but I think a little bit offset never hurts. And then he's going to spring up and end up somewhere up here. He's also going to get a bit bigger, so let's do his scale as well. And shoom, and then he's going to kind of fall towards the end over there like that. So now we know like his basic positions in space, how long he's flying for, blah, blah, blah. We're going to go back and add some easing to that later, but for now, let's look at this roll. So to get our 3D roll, basically what we want to do is some hectic layer cutting. And I've done this already in this composition here, so we can see what we're looking at before we do it. But basically I have his body squish, and then as he jumps, all these layers kind of alpha matte and cut behind each other. So you can see here his pupils and eyes and everything are just a cut layer of animation that jumps behind. And then when we come back up, it jumps in front of him again in that order. So that's how basically this stuff is done, and a little bit of shape path animating. So let's jump back into our working comp that we're working with now and have a look at how we approach this. So I'm going to start with the main biggest item, which is his body, and it's going to drive most of his movement. And we're going to start with a path animation here. So I'll put a keyframe on this path just a little bit further ahead. I'll work out the timing sort of, when we're closer, but we want him to squish basically. So if you double click when you have a path selected, it'll bring up like transform controls, and then you can squish it from the center, and I'm holding command or control, which will do it evenly proportionally. And now we can see that if we had like a top bottom view of this crab, he's going to get a bit squished on the side. And then as our animation continues, if we see in our comp here, he also kind of, when he spins, he comes to the side too. So we need this shape basically to match. So I'm going to show you, let's just solo our body, and we'll go back into Illustrator, and from our still project, we'll get this shape. And again, this is where Overlord is really helpful because we can just push it directly. But if you don't have Overlord, you can just copy this onto a new blank file, drop it in, and then we can drag that in. So now we can use this basically as our reference. I'm gonna create shapes out of it because then I can very easily change its color and see what we're working with. But I'm just gonna add this one to the back of my body and put it in about the same position, and then put another keyframe on our path and move that to match those points. And now we have our body which squishes and then moves into our final shape. So the next thing we can do is the eyes, which I think is sort of the most selling, the bit that sells that animation the most. So if we have our eye things, position and path, we want keyframes on. All right, so we've got keyframes on our position and our path of our eye things, and we also want them on our, position. Let's do position and path on our pupils as well. Great, so when we squish, our eyes are we're imagining that they're going behind his body, right? So they're kind of actually gonna go, they're coming down as he bends, and then they're gonna go up here. So this keyframe, actually, let's chuck some more keyframes here. So they're going down, and then we're going to go up a little bit more here. So let's use the position of these to do that, since they're all connected. And once it's kind of basically almost past that body, we can actually chop it. But let's do the rest of the animation first, and then we'll do the chopping because it kind of makes it a little bit easier. So this is in the roll. We're going to have them move, have these ones move back. Cool. So we basically just want to make it small when it goes behind him. All the path shapes are small, and then when they come out the other side, they're going to expand again to their full width, because it's kind of like you're imagining he's going over, and then it's going to come back. Let's see how fast this is going. Yeah, it's a bit slow, isn't it? So let's bring these keyframes in. And then he's going to come back up. So let's just copy these keyframes over so we get his start position. And we kind of want to match again the drawing that we have in our scene. So you can see his eyes are sort of squished together and a bit to the side because his body has changed. So let's move those over as well. So yeah, basically we're just going in and matching that drawing again. It's pretty good. He bends and then it comes around. I think we need a bit more kind of like length here so that we can see that he's really come around. So these can kind of come back to their full length. And then we want them to come back to being small again as they pass in front of him. Okay, so that's the kind of the basic principle. You would block out the animation first like this, and then it can be a little bit of back and forth now. Like what I would do is at the point where he gets almost past, these eye bits get almost past the back of your shape, we're going to Command Shift and D to split the layer, and then bring that in front like that, or bring that up just so we can see. And then at the point where it's almost off the back again, we're gonna do that again, Command Shift D, and then Command close bracket to separate those layers. And these are basically just our back pieces. So now we can Command Shift close bracket and send them right to the back. So now you see his eyes go in front, and then they pass around his body like this, and we kind of get this idea of 3D movement. To really sell this, you should spend a bit of time tweaking these keyframes. You can tweak things like the timing of when things land. So like his eyes, for instance, are probably going to land a little bit later than these eye noodly bits that he has. Like a little bit of offset in these will help. Also a little bit of things like follow through and anticipation. So maybe they land and then we go a little bit up on these, and then they kind of jump back into position as well. So like that. And you probably want to, if he's rolling back, it's good that his eyes are in front of the noodles here, crab noodles. But then at this point they might be behind. So you can get like a few layers deep in this cutting thing, like here the eyes are going to be behind the noodles as they're coming up that way, and then they slip in front there too. So there we go. That's the basic principle of that rotate, and I'm just going to apply those same kind of techniques to the other elements. So in our one that I prepared earlier, you can see here that our body shape here is path keyframed to just move up, and then once it's out of frame of his body, because there's no shadow on this top part, there's a hold keyframe that is jumping it back to the start when it's ready to come back up. So it just kind of jumps into the right position. The same with the mouth. And because his legs and arms are kind of from the top, a crab is just kind of gonna have straight arms through there. I just put some position keyframes that swapped his legs. So for instance, that top leg comes all the way over and becomes the front leg, and then it goes back to being that top leg. So it's like all the legs have flipped. And then you can, add, I think for the arms, I think you can get away with just having them closed. So it kind of looks like they're the same sort of all around, like the 360 of a crab claw is going to be probably pretty similar. So that basically is how you do that. I've also added another shadow in here from the drawing that animates itself on as he turns to the side, and added a bunch of secondary animation to the legs and things like that too. So this is a bit of a fiddly process, and it'll take you a while to get it right. But if you block out those initial movements and then keep kind of tweaking from there, you will get something that looks pretty convincing. Once you have this animation looking pretty good and happening at the right time, you can also come back out into your main scene and finesse the easing on these keyframes, moving his overall position and scale. And you can see if I open up his position in my graph editor, the easing is really simple. We're just like keeping him still for this jump, and then I really like pushed the speed of that initial jump off, and then he kind of slowly fades into place, almost like he's swimming under the sea type thing. And I've also gone through and animated this back shape just really simply here as well to match our storyboard. So it grows at the end of our storyboard. It's basically in the same spot there, and changes color. Pretty simple stuff there. I also parented both of these things to this crab position, which is just giving us a little bit of sideways movement, gives us a little bit more dynamicism. I think it's always good when to not have animations ever stop. unless of course it has to, but it's nice to just kind of keep that movement flowing, always something moving basically. So this project is in the description, so I would jump in and have a look through this as well so you can see exactly how it all works. I think pulling apart other people's work is the best way to learn sometimes. So do that, jump in, try and animate the crab yourself using this technique. So that's the basics of using parenting and shape paths. Now for our grandma, we could use this method, but it's going to be a heck of a lot easier to achieve her more complex movements if we use a rig. Creating a rig in After Effects basically means using a third-party plugin to create a bone structure that lets you pose and keyframe the movement of your character's limbs and body. There are a few major plugins out there to choose from. Duik, which is probably the most widely used, but can be a little bit complex, or Rubberhose and Limba are the other main players. Today, I'm going to use Limba, which I think is the simplest yet most efficient and effective plugin out there right now. And it's perfect for this simple scene. So let's open AI first and take a look at our artwork. So I have created this little drawing of a grandma in a previous tutorial, and we've already layered it, which is pretty good. But I think the first thing I'm going to want to do is move this into its own comp and scale it up a little bit, because we don't really want to, this is vector, so it's not so much of an issue, but ideally you want to always work a little bit bigger than you need so that in your end comp, if for some instance I end up needing to scale her really big, it's not going to cause any problems down the line. So I'm going to just make a copy of this file so that we retain her layer structure and save this as grandma rig. So then we can delete everything else out of here as well, and we can get rid of our background scene and our crab. We just want our character. I'm going to make this artboard 1920 by 1920, and then I'm just going to scale her up, keeping the stroke width the same. So if you go scale and then press enter, you can bring up these presets and you can go scale, strokes and effects as well. So let's maybe double her size there, and then her stroke will be the same. So everything's on different layers. It's all here in our folder, and she's a bit bigger. There's enough room that we can still, move all her limbs out and she's not going to fall off the canvas, but she's a bit bigger than she was in that original comp. So the next thing we need to do is just grab elements from the storyboard that are not in this rig but are part of her character. So that's things like her eye and her mouth changes. We want those in our new file, and we also want this alternate foot, and we want to give them their own layers too. So, and then we're just going to pop these like where they should be on her face, so because we've scaled up. So when we have a character for animation, if it's been built nicely, you'll have nice separate limbs for each kind of point that needs to pivot. At each join, you want a clear circle join. Now this one, you can see it's kind of been done a bit jankily and it's not a perfect circle here. So let's fix that before we move it over. So if I have this limb together about the way that we want it to look, I'm going to draw a new circle here about where the elbow is. Oops. And if I hold Alt, it will scale from the center, Alt and Shift, to about the right width of that shape. And then what I'm going to do is use my direct selection tool here just to delete all these paths from my shape, all these sort of end ones. I drew this, using the pen tool quite jankily, so it ends up being a janky shape, which I think actually, is a style of animation that works. But for rigging, it sometimes is not great to have it be so kind of messy. So now I just have these 2 points that were the width of the arm, and if I go Command Y, I can bring up my outlines, and I want to connect these points with the side of the circle here. So if I click this and click that, and you've got snapping on, you can see where that anchor point is. We're going to go across now to this anchor point and connect it up there. And then we're going to do the same for this arm as well. And you can see it looks basically the same as it did, but now we have this circle in the middle that we can perfectly rotate from, and we're going to have a seamless join. So our arm is separated correctly into a lower and an upper part, which is good, but you can see that our upper part here has the circle, but our lower part doesn't. So we want them both to have that circle join on them. So Command C, Command F, and then we can drag it onto the lower arm layer here so that now there is a circle join on both of these layers. You can see that we have two perfectly matching circles at either end of our limb. And that would be the same if you wanted to add a wrist to this hand. You would also need to have the join be half here and half on the end of this hand as well. So we're going to do the same thing for the legs basically, and just neaten up these circles and joins. And then what we're going to do is just duplicate that to remake the back. So let's copy this arm onto our back layer. There we go. And then I'm just going to select all of these to change the colors of all these things to our back color. Cool. And then we're going to make sure that we're still split our layers properly too. And then we can just put that back together. If you want to be really finicky, you can check it's all lined up in there. And I'm going to do the same thing for the legs as well. Just replace those, make sure they line up as close as possible to the original drawing, and put back in these masks and stuff. Okay, and to save you watching every click, fast forwarded through time here, the magic of editing, to our kind of finished prepped artwork here. So all of our arms and legs are in the right position. Another thing we want to do before we bring this into After Effects is to get rid of any textures that are here in Illustrator, because they will just be annoying to deal with in After Effects, and we're going to redo them in there anyway. So you can see this leg group still has a roughen texture on it. So if you jump into your appearance panel, we can click that and delete it, and now it'll be nice and smooth. And we also can't import image textures into After Effects, so we need to bring them in separately. So I'm just going to get rid of that in our drawing as well by double clicking into the clipping mask and deleting that image out. That is our artwork prepared, and now we can bring this into After Effects and start rigging. Okay, so we're going to bring our grandma rig into our comp stack here, and we're just going to keep it as a composition, retaining our layer sizes as usual. Click into that, and she's come over pretty good. Looks nice to me. Let's do the same thing that we did with our crab and convert all of our shapes into vector layers. We are going to start by moving our anchor points around. So again, we're just going to quickly go through and shift our points of all of our elements to the right places. So her body is going to rotate from about here, and her hips from the center there. We don't need to worry about the arms because Limba's going to take care of them. What else do we need to do? We just need to do the feet, rotation points there, and then the head stuff. So all her head elements today I'm going to put in a pre-composition just for neatness. So we can select all of these shapes. What else do we need? Ears, the hair, and her turtleneck shape. And we can pre-compose that into a comp called Head Rig Grandma. Lovely. And now we have also just a bit less layers to deal with. And then I'm just going to do some basic parenting as well. So her body should parent to the hip. Her head needs to parent to the body, and I think that's it for now as well, because Limba is going to take care of the rest. So I'm just going to also do some color coding. Great, so everything's a bit more organized. Our right arm is on the top because we want it to, you know, when it moves in front of the face. Great. And the rest of the textures I'm going to add back in later. For now, let's turn off our head, and we're just going to focus on rigging this arm, and we're going to use Limber today. So we can open up Limber here. It'll be in your scripts panel if you've got it. And Limber makes everything really easy. We can, when we have custom artwork like this, the easiest way to do it is to add a circle limb. So I'm just going to solo these properties actually. So we've just got our arm. Let's add this circle arm. And what we get is 3 indicators basically that we can drag on top of the artwork and place where we want our points to rotate from. So we can see, you know, there's kind of our middle point. If you want to be really precise, you can Command R and drag out some rulers over where the center of that circle is so that you can put your joint indicator right there. And then, you know, her arm's not a perfect shape, so you want to just kind of follow the artwork when you're using this type of limb. And then it's really easy. We're just going to select all our indicators in sort of start to end order, and then our artwork. So select the start, the joint, the end, this holding shift to select multiple at a time, and then the upper and the lower, and come up into Limber's panel here and go new. And you can double check here that you've selected the right ones at the right time. So you should have start joint end for start joint end, and right upper outlines and right lower outlines. And then in our layer names, we just want to rename this to be right and this to be arm, and then hit OK. And Limber magically will give you 2 controllers for our arm that will bend exactly how we want it. And it's pretty spectacular that it becomes this easy. Now, if we unhide all of these, obviously our arm is moving the wrong way. So Limber on your wrist settings will give you a bunch of settings that you can change. And we just want to change the clockwise value of this to be completely the other way. And then also, I don't want stretch because we're not making Elastigirl today. She's just a little granny. So I'm going to switch that off so that now when I pull this, it's going to get to a point that it stops at. So that is the process. I'm going to do the same thing for the other arm. And actually, it's easier if you already have, you know, it's basically exactly the same artwork. So all we have to do is have something selected from that arm and hit duplicate. And then it's going to know my preset. Now I want the left arm. And we can tick it on to have that suffix as well. And hit OK. And now it's created us a left arm. So if I select all these layers, and I'll just make these a different color as well, I can shift that arm, and it also works independently and you know, moves exactly as we want it. So I'm going to put that in the right place for our arm to be. If I turn off our, actually let's just solo these ones and solo our original art, and we can match this exactly with where it needs to be. And also the good thing that I really like about Limber is this art is all completely editable, which is like super handy, because now I can just come in and I can pick with the color of all these elements to the color of the original artwork, which is just a bit of a time saver. So gonna go in and pick whip that to that. Great. Okay, drop it behind the body, and then I can delete those arm layers as well. So now I have, if I bring I like to keep my controllers up the top, I suppose, because they're just a bit easier to see and grab, and we don't really need to worry so much about the actual artwork anymore once the controller is created. But now I have 2 controllers, and that all kind of works. So if I move the hip now, obviously we're good, we're moving the body, but there's a few things that now need to be parented. So firstly, we've got to do the straps. So let's put those on the body, which is, the body is here. I think let's make the body like a really bright color, because it's one we use a lot. I think hip and body are good to have something super bright so you can see. So we need to parent our shoulder elements to the body as well. So select both of those and hit body. And now if we rotate our body, our shoulders will move with the body like they do on any grandma. Okay, great. So the same process is the same for the legs as well. So I'm just going to quickly go through that. Okay, so I've just done the same thing for the legs and duplicated those. And if I delete my left leg, which is the one that I duplicated, you can see obviously we've lost our alpha mat of the shadow. But that's okay. We just have to, I'm just gonna also, this one I think I've got to bump up a bit to avoid coming through the bottom of that shoe. Because now we can just alpha mat that shadow to our limber limb that it created for us. So that's that left leg layer there, and then we'll switch them back on. So maybe a little bit of color coding and reorganizing is needed again now that we've created a bunch of new limbs. Oh, I'm choosing too much purple, aren't I? But it's good. I think, yeah, the color coding is a really helpful thing when you are animating with all these layers and you want to quickly know what's what. So our shadow is connected into our limber layer. And now if I move these legs, you can see that our shoes are not going anywhere, which is not what would happen. We don't want anybody to know that our grandma is actually footless. So what we need to do is create a locator, which you can do by selecting the joint that you want it to be connected to, which in this case is the ankle, and clicking this button here, add locator. And actually you can move this locator wherever you want along the limb, which is really cool for adding things. Like if I wanted to add a pocket or something, I could add this locator to the, I don't know, anyone would have a pocket on the inside of their thigh, but if she wanted to, you could put that there. But for now, we can pop this all the way down to the end. And then all we need to do is parent this foot, which is this one, to that locator. If we move the ankle, our foot goes with it, which is pretty bloody awesome. So I'm just going to do the same thing again for the other ankle, other leg, adding a locator and parenting that foot to the locator. And now that works. Cool. So if we now parent our hips to our hip layer and we move our hips, yay, everything is moving. Let's give her head back because why not? Great. Now this rotation is not what would happen if you were to jump, obviously. So the way to fix that is just to go into your locator settings and change the auto rotate to 0. And then you can keyframe that manually using this, but it will also be a kind of just a posing problem too. So you probably would want to, when you bend her hips, just sort of think about where you're positioning for her. When you're bending your character, you know, it's more about choosing a position that isn't going too deep, because if you go too deep, you're going to break the rig. But in this sort of position, it looks pretty good. Great. So let's talk about IK and FK very quickly. So IK is inverse kinematics, and it basically means it's a chain controlled by the ends. In this case, it's her foot. If I move the foot or hip even, her knee will bend. FK is forward kinematics, and it means we get control over each joint and can rotate each one independently, and the movement will flow top down, kind of more like that pin puppet thing we talked about. IK is best when we want her feet to be planted while her hips move, and this would be a difficult thing to animate on FK. FK is best when we want natural arcs in our animation, like a wave or as she lifts her arm. We could animate her arm on IK, but it will be more difficult to move it in the arc we want. FK is a little bit more keyframing, but it makes the movement way more natural. So that's the difference between IK and FK. We want our arms, in this case, to be FK, and we want our legs to be IK so that when she bends and jumps and things like that, the feet are planted to the floor. What if we need some elements in the rig to change to match our poses? Say, for instance, the eye shape or the mouth. With a couple expressions and effectors, this is really easy. Let's quickly look at some little rig tricks you can do to kind of have a quicker workflow and be a bit more flexible. In our head rig, we've got all of these layers, and I'm going to show you a couple quite easy tricks on how to switch between elements of your design that you don't want up at the same time. For instance, her mouth, we only want one mouth at a time. So let's pre-compose both of these, and we'll call this mouth. Hit OK. And then we can jump into here, and I'm going to zoom all the way in and cut these layers so they're just a frame each using Option close bracket, and then spread them out across time. So then we're going to trim our comp to just those 2 frames. And I know what you're thinking, a 2-frame comp, how is that going to be useful at all? Well, it will be if we put a time remap on this layer. So we're going to hit enable time remapping. So now we have both our shapes on the first and second frames. This keyframe has nothing on it, so we want to get rid of it. So let's just chuck another keyframe here for our second shape, delete that one, and then we're going to control this effect with a slider. So in your effects presets, we can chuck a slider control on, and then pick whip using Alt click that slider control to our time remap. And I'm just going to rename this mouth shape. And this is the same process if you had to have a character that talked and you had many mouth shapes. Now basically I can use this slider. It's going to be a small value, so let's right click to edit the value and make this 1. And you might have to just see where it leads to, but I think it's going to be 0.05 because we're at 1 frame. So 0.05 is our second shape, 0 is our first one, and now we have the ability to use this slider to quickly choose between those shapes. So I'm going to do the same exact thing for the eyes. So now our eyes and our mouth are on these sliders, which are in our effects here. Now we're just going to do a couple more things to this head rig so that it's all ready to go. So I'm going to add a new null object and put that in the center of her face and call it face control. And then I'm going to choose all of the things that are a bit off her face and parent them to that face control. So things like the front of her hair there, the glasses, her nose, and her chin and her chin shadow there, and then her ears. We're going to parent that to the face control, and that means you can kind of move that around while her face shape stays the same, and it'll give kind of like the appearance of the fact that her head is turning slightly, which is just a bit more interesting for us to look at. Now this hair needs to be track matted to the head outlines as well, so I'm just going to do that. So now that moves properly like so. And so yeah, now we have a bit of space, bit of flexibility here for the direction of our face. And lastly, I just want to make sure that it's all rotating off a similar axis as well, so the face control can then get parented to the turtleneck. The turtleneck will be our rotation control. So everything that's not connected to the face control, which will just be the head shape and the hair back outlines, we can connect up to the neck. So that's it for our head rig. You can also put an expression on the position of the hair back outlines to reverse its position, which kind of sells this 3D head turn a bit more. So if we pick whip that to the face control position and then add plus a value down here, which basically just means we still determine the position of this hair, and then we can move it back to where it should be. And then we put a minus in front of this. Now when we move, it's also going to move that in reverse. So when we're moving it just a little bit, that's going to look quite good. One handy way to stay organized is to make use of the Essential Graphics panel. In this instance, I am just going to use this technique on her head. So let's find this head rig. Now there's a lot of old stuff in this project. Head rig grammar is this comp now. And I'm just going to put the properties that I want to be able to animate in my main rig comp in the Essential Graphics thing. So the position of our face control that we were just playing with there, the slider controls that we put on the mouth shape here, and the eye shape, like that. And then also the position and rotation of our turtleneck layer, which is essentially our neck, because she doesn't have a neck, given she's an old granny. So that's what we're going to use instead, is this turtleneck shape right now. And if I jump back into our main rig now and toggle down the essential properties, I can now change these elements from here, which saves a lot of time. So the last thing that we want to do to this rig is make this foot be able to transition between that pointed foot look we have, which looks like that, and the normal foot that we have. So what we're going to do is pre-compose this foot, and I'm just going to jump into this one that I did before to show you. So I've pre-composed the foot here. It's still connected in the same way. And all I did was bring in my pointed foot and put it in the pointed foot, straight foot, put it in the same place as my original one, and then animated over time the paths to match the overall shape of this pointed one. And the reason it's moving slightly to the left there as well is because if I lock this comp and if I basically if I moved that right ankle, see the position that the original foot in isn't far back enough. So by moving it on the path layer to match, you can see now the foot, when it's in that position, matches there, and when it's in okay, hold me. So I've animated it so that over time it changes into the second foot, and then I've used the same technique that we used for the mouth shapes, but instead of it just being 2 frames, now it slides between this animation. This is just the same thing on both sides now. So now this slider, it's the same technique where I've got this comp where this animation happens, and then I time remapped it, enable time remapping, cut off the end frame because that's a frame of nothing. So I'm just gonna put a keyframe before and delete that one. And then I put a slider control on this layer, called it foot animation, and I pick whipped the expression property of the time remap to that slider. So now when I move the slider, it moves the animation, which means instead of it snapping as well, I've got a few tween frames that I can use to have a more natural animation as well. So that is another really handy thing to do. If your rig is pretty simple, you can actually use the Essential Graphics panel for the whole rig and do all your animating in your scene comp. It also means you have one base rig that you can drop into multiple scenes and animate over and over. And then if the client decides, actually, we want her jumper to be blue now, or her head to be bigger or something, I only need to make that update once and it will change across all my scenes, which for big projects is pretty ideal. The downsides of this is that it tends to slow down the project just because it adds a lot of expressions, and it's a bit less flexible, so you need a pretty straightforward rig. If you want to make specific path changes across your animation, say changing the shape of the shadow, you can't really do that as freely, and you'd have to approach that more similarly to how we rigged her foot that changes shape. In this video, because it's just the one scene and I have these shadow details on her arm that I want to independently animate, and her head rig is already in an Essential Graphics comp, I'm going to animate her in the original rig comp. So the last thing I want to do is just bring back in our textures that we need, any textures at the very end. So I've got the pattern that we used for our jumper, which I'm just going to pre-compose and call this knit texture. And then I'm going to scale that down till it's about the right size, and let's just drop it behind the body. There it is. And I just have to alpha mat it to the body and parent it and kind of just fit it into place. That looks pretty good. I think it's on a bit of an angle too in the drawing, so something like that. And now if we rotate our body, our texture is in there as well, and that looks pretty good to me. I think we're about ready for animation. Let's drop our rig into our main scene. Perfect, she's nice and big, which is what we like. And if I just turn on my storyboard, I'll be able to see the size we need her at. And similar to what we did with the crab, I'm just going to go through and block out like the main steps of her animation in here. So, oops, maybe like 45. So about here is where she's bending. She's still the same position and scale. And then she's going to jump up and she's going to get that big. So you can sort of make these little adjustments. We'll do all of that rotation in the rig comp. So that's about where we want her. Probably want it to jump with the crab as well. So that's that little bit of animation. And then now we've got her in there, let's just switch off this storyboard layer. But we can lock this comp here and then open our grandma rig. And so now we have this double view where you can see what's happening in this rig comp and animate accordingly. And then you can see the changes that are made in your main scene comp as well, which makes it really handy when you're animating a rig comp. Another thing I'm going to do is actually just make a copy of this rig before I start. You might want to use this rig in a different scene later where she does something else. You don't want to have to come through and delete all this animation and repose her when she's kind of ready to go. Always good to just keep a backup spare comp before you go too hard into animating. So we're ready to animate our granny. I'm gonna turn on, in our main scene, I'm gonna turn on this storyboard and go to her bend pose here and kind of just match what she's doing. I think it's best to start trying to match the poses first, and then you can work out the in-betweens as you go. So then you can start posing. You want to put keyframes on all the important stuff. So the position, or we're using FK for the arms. So let's delete these old keyframes. Put this at her starting position and keyframe that. You're going to want keyframes on her hip and her body rotation and position. So yeah, you basically just go through, make your poses, and then you want to think about animation principles. So things like anticipation, this sort of bend movement that she does is the anticipation moment. So if I go forward actually in time to where that happened, this is where she bends, her hips are going to be the first thing to make that movement, and it's just really a process of adjusting. We also probably want her to bend this way a lot more and rotate this body as well, like that. Then we can use the FK rotations to get her into that pose. So yeah, basically I'm just going to go through and match all her poses here as best I can to the illustration. You might also need to put some separate animation on things like the shadows so that we don't lose them, and that's why we've kept them on separate layers too, so that we just have like a bit more control over those to match the artworks. And changing things like her eyes, when she hits that bottom pose, a lot of character animation is just being clever about, you know, if you're looking down, you're probably going to shut your eyes on the way. You know, what are things that normal people are going to do when they move about the world. So that's kind of it, how to rig and start your animation of a character. It is a bit of a time-consuming and fiddly process. So let's fast forward in time again to our finished scene. So I've tweaked that animation of my grandma, thinking about all of my animation principles and making sure that there is good like anticipation and follow through and kind of a chain of animation going up her body and out to her limbs as that animation goes along. And as you can see, it's going to be a bit heavy on your computer probably because there's a lot of layers connected here and all working against each other and for each other. Once I am happy with my animation, timing and all that jazz, I will go back in and apply the textures and effects to match our initial storyboards. There's two really simple things we can do, and the first is just adding a new adjustment layer and putting a turbulent displace over the top, which is going to be too big to start with. That looks pretty good, but let's do maybe 30 and a size of 2. So now we have this kind of really small boil. I think we can turn up the complexity a little bit as well. And this is the thing you want to do like last in your project because it is a bit of a slow effect as well. Maybe a little bit less because we don't want it to look too... and you can, you know, try out these other looks and see if there's one that suits your look better, but I'm going to do that. And we'll also chuck a posterized time on there to control the frame rate separately. So let's do at 12 frames a second. And now if we play this through and let it cache, put it on fit, we have some texture. So there you go. There's 2 ways to animate in After Effects your characters. We've got just some simple parenting and shape paths with the crab on the right, and we've got a full limber rig for our granny on the left. Now, it's a long process and there's a lot of tweaking to do in the animation itself, and you know, for each character it's always going to be a bit different, but the name of the game really is to make sure that your files are prepped and ready before you jump into After Effects, and to remember your principles once you get into animating. And voila, that is our animation. Now, while computers have made animation a lot simpler than what it used to be in the heyday Disney days, it is still a finicky and time-consuming process, so don't sweat it if this is taking you a long time. It should. This animation actually took me about a day to complete, but nobody really wants to watch a 24-hour-long tutorial, so we're just giving you the highlights today. I hope you found this tutorial helpful, and I'd love to see what you've made, so drop it in the comments and we'll make sure to check it out. Thanks for watching.